In the summer of 1858, the British Parliament, the governing body of the largest empire the world had ever seen, was forced to close, not by war, not by revolution, by smell, the smell of human waste. The River Thames had become so saturated with human waste that curtains soaked in chloride of lime couldn't mask the stench. Members of Parliament fled the building, some vomited. Others collapsed from the fumes. The temperature hit 35 degrees Celsius, 95 Fahrenheit. And the river that ran through the heart of the world's most powerful city had become an open sewer, a biohazard zone stretching miles in both directions. Here's what makes this truly extraordinary. 2,400 years earlier, Rome had solved this problem. The Cloaca Maxima, the greatest sewer, had been draining the Roman Forum since 600 BCE, still functional, still carrying waste to the Tiber River. Rome had 11 aqueducts, delivering nearly 1 million cubic meters of fresh water per day. They had 856 public bathhouses, 144 public latrines. Victorian London had cholera. Victorian London had death. This is the story of how humanity went backwards for 1,800 years, and how Victorian engineers had to study ancient Roman blueprints to save their own city, to relearn what Rome had already known. To understand how the most advanced civilization of the 19th century fell behind a 2,000-year-old empire, we need to examine the numbers, not the battles, not the politics, the engineering, the mathematics of survival. Because empires aren't built on ideology, they're built on infrastructure, on the ability to move water, remove waste, and keep millions of people alive in concentrated urban spaces, on engineering that functions when everything else fails. And by that measure, Rome wasn't just ahead of Victorian London. Rome was operating on a completely different level. Let's start with what Rome actually built. The scale, the precision, the sheer audacity. By the 3rd century CE, Rome had constructed 11 major aqueducts with a combined length of approximately 800 kilometers. That's nearly 500 miles of precision-engineered water channels, built without modern surveying equipment. Only about 47 kilometers ran on the famous elevated arches. The rest was buried underground, following the natural contours of the terrain with extraordinary precision. Gravity-powered perfection carved through solid rock. The engineering precision is staggering. Roman aqueducts maintained gradients as shallow as 34 centimeters per kilometer. That's about 1.8 feet of drop per mile. Nearly imperceptible to the human eye, but mathematically perfect. The Pont du Gard in France drops only 56 feet over its entire 31-mile length. That's a slope so gentle you couldn't detect it with the naked eye. Yet water flowed for centuries without pumps. Yet precise enough to keep water flowing by gravity alone for decades, for centuries. The result? Rome's aqueducts delivered between 600,000 and 1 million cubic meters of water per day. More water than most modern cities. For a population of roughly 1 million people, that translates to somewhere between 500 and 1,000 liters per person per day. To put that in perspective, that's more water per capita than ancient Rome's citizens needed. The average American today uses about 300 liters per day. Ancient Romans at their peak may have had access to 3 times that amount. 3 times more water than a modern developed nation provides. But water delivery was only half the equation. What Rome truly mastered was the complete cycle, water in, waste out. The Cloaca Maxima was the trunk line of this system, the backbone of urban survival. Begun around 600 BCE under King Tarquinius Priscus, the Cloaca Maxima was large enough for a wagon of hay to pass through. We're talking about a main channel roughly 3 to 4 meters high. Industrial-scale infrastructure. The main channel was 2 to 3 meters wide, running 1.6 kilometers from the Forum to the Tiber River. This wasn't just a drain, it was the trunk line of an entire sewage network, a complete urban drainage system, constantly flushed by overflow from the aqueducts and public fountains, self-cleaning through continuous flow. And the public infrastructure was extraordinary. By the 4th century CE, Rome had 856 registered public bathhouses, 856 functioning facilities. The baths of Caracalla alone covered 25 hectares and could accommodate 1,600 bathers simultaneously, with 6,000 to 8,000 people passing through daily. The population of a small town processed every single day. The Natatio, the main swimming pool, was nearly the size of a modern Olympic pool, surrounded by walls 65 feet tall. Rome also maintained 144 public latrines, free, accessible, continuously flushed with running water. Many of them multi-seat facilities where citizens could conduct business, both kinds, in relative comfort. This was sanitation at an industrial scale, infrastructure that served 1 million people simultaneously without mechanical pumps or electricity. And then it all fell apart. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, the infrastructure didn't disappear overnight, but the system that maintained it did. The knowledge, the organization, the will. Aqueducts require constant inspection, clearing, and repair. Without a centralized tax base and engineering bureaucracy, leaks went unpatched, channels silted up, war damage accumulated. Nature reclaimed what Rome had built through mathematics and stone. By the early Middle Ages, most of Rome's aqueducts had failed. The great bathhouses were abandoned, dismantled, or converted into other structures. Marble torn out for churches, bronze stripped for weapons. 800 years of engineering knowledge lost in a generation. Across Europe, cities contracted. Populations that had numbered in the hundreds of thousands shrank to tens of thousands. Complex water systems simply couldn't function without the aqueducts, without the engineering expertise, without the organized maintenance that Rome had perfected. What replaced them? Cesspits, open drains, chamber pots emptied into streets. Medieval London relied on gong farmers, workers who emptied overflowing cesspits at night, by hand, without protection, for pennies. This was the regression. For 400 years, Europe's cities operated on sanitation systems that would have been primitive by Roman standards. By the 1850s, London had become the largest city in the world, the capital of the British Empire, and it was drowning in shit. Population approaching 3 million, and its sanitation infrastructure was medieval. The city had approximately 200,000 cesspits, many overflowing directly into the ground, into the water table, into the wells people drank from every day, contaminating wells that people still used for drinking water. The rest drained into the Thames, the same river that supplied much of London's water, the same river where cholera bred, where death multiplied exponentially in the summer heat. Then came the flush toilet. Invented with good intentions, it overwhelmed the cesspit system entirely. Now, instead of waste sitting in pits, it flowed continuously into the river. Continuous contamination, continuous death. The cure became the poison. The result was predictable. Cholera struck London in 1831 to 32, 1848, 49, and 1853 to 54. Tens of thousands died. In the 1854 Soho outbreak alone, 600 people died within 10 days. 10 days of continuous death in a single neighborhood. Dr. John Snow traced that outbreak to a single contaminated water pump on Broad Street, proving that cholera spread through water, not bad air. But the establishment largely ignored him. The miasma theory held firm. Science lost to dogma. Meanwhile, ancient Rome had accidentally solved this problem 2,000 years earlier by keeping drinking water and sewage in completely separate systems. Aqueducts delivered clean water, sewers removed waste. Never the two systems crossed, simple, effective, lost to history. The summer of 1858 brought everything to a crisis. Temperatures averaged around 35 degrees Celsius, 95 Fahrenheit. The Thames, already saturated with sewage, began to cook, to ferment, to release gases that burned the eyes and throat of anyone nearby. The smell became so overwhelming that Parliament, whose building sat directly on the riverbank, could not function. This was the Great Stink, and it finally forced action. Not science, not data, not thousands of dead, just the smell reaching the powerful. Parliament authorized $3 million, equivalent to hundreds of millions today, for a complete reconstruction of London's sewage system. The man who would design it was Joseph Bazalgette, a civil engineer who understood that Rome had already solved this problem. And here's the crucial detail. Bazalgette and his contemporaries explicitly studied Roman engineering. Edwin Chadwick cited the Cloaca Maxima as proof that large-scale urban drainage was both ancient and effective. Rome became the blueprint, the validation, the proof. What Bazalgette built was extraordinary, but it was also in principle Roman. His system consisted of 82 miles of main intercepting sewers running parallel to the Thames. Gravity-powered, continuous flow, separate from drinking water, just like Rome. Fed by 100 miles of street sewers. The construction required 318 million bricks. The main sewers were built in egg-shaped cross-sections, a design that maintained flow velocity. Victorian engineering recreating Roman principles with Victorian materials. History repeating through necessity. The result was transformative. Cholera essentially disappeared from London. But consider the timeline. Rome built the Cloaca Maxima around 600 BCE. London didn't achieve comparable sanitation until the 1870s. 2,170 years to relearn a solved problem. That's the cost of forgetting. Rome didn't fall because of barbarians. It fell because the systems that kept 1 million people alive in one city stopped being maintained. Infrastructure doesn't negotiate. It doesn't compromise. It either functions or it kills you. That's a lesson worth remembering.